Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on what used to be a Troy-Bilt snowblower. And as you can tell, this thing was picked pretty clean. Not much remains of the snowblower except for a few drive components, but the engine seems to be complete. With the exception of the head bolts. You know, someone picked this clean and then threw it away, so I don't really know the history on this or why it was thrown away, but when pulling the engine over, you know, I can tell there is no compression. The engine rotates just fine, and of course, without head bolts, you would think, of course, there is no compression, but I'm thinking the loss of compression happened before the head bolts were removed because the seal on the head isn't even broken. So if it was building compression, that seal should be blown out and compression coming out of there. But we're not getting anything. So yeah, this engine, it might be trash, but I'm hoping we can get it back up and running again. So that's what we're going to find out today. So let me get set up a little bit better and get going on this. I'm going to check the oil real quick before we start pulling the engine over. And it looks like there is no oil, which kind of makes sense since this was thrown away. So I am going to add a bit of oil before I start turning the engine over. You know, I want to start just by checking for spark and throw a compression tester in there as well and just get a baseline of where we're at. Yeah, we're right at the full mark, maybe a touch over, but that should be fine. We are close enough. Ooh, plug is in there pretty good. And yet, the seal for the head is still not broken. No rust, that is a good sign. All right, let's give this a try. We're looking for the spark to jump the 1/4-inch gap, and the compression, you know, I don't know if this has a decompression system. If it does, you know, 60 psi is about the best we'll see, but I'm thinking we're going to see a lot closer to 0. Okay, we got spark. But nothing. Absolutely nothing for compression. So yeah, as expected, there is no compression, but we do have spark. So all we need is compression, fuel, and timing, and we might have an engine here. So I'm thinking it's pretty much unavoidable. We need to just jump in and get the head off. You know, someone's already done some of the work for us. And take a look to see what the issue is. So to get the head off, we do need to start peeling some layers, I think starting with the blower housing, since that, as it is, will not allow the head to lift off. And the same for the exhaust. There is a bracket right there, and with these things in place, we can't actually get the head off. So in order to get the exhaust off, I think we also need to pull this bracket right here, which seems to be pretty loosely on there. So yeah, let's get these things out of the way. We'll get the head off, and with any luck, it'll be something easy like a stuck valve or maybe a valve that needs adjusting. So this lever, it's kind of in the way, so I'm thinking I might just start there. We'll get that off. It actually must have been a pretty nice snowblower back in the day. Most don't have an actual transmission. They are just, you know, belt drive with a disc. But this one, built a little bit better than most. Anyway, let's get that bolt out. Just putting this bolt loosely back because I know this thing is going to launch out of here. So that'll keep it relatively close to the machine and not go flying across the shop. Jeez, we're off to a bad start. Yeah, it's coming. There we go. Yeah, so at some point we are going to have to deal with this carb. The throttle plate, well, it was stuck. It is moving, but it's very, very gummy. And like this, the governor would not be able to slow the engine down. So, yeah, we'll worry about that when we get to that point. So what do you suppose the odds are that these are going to come out? I'd say a little bit low. You know, it would be better if they used actual bolts with a hex head instead of, you know, a Phillips screw. Okay, there's one. Nice. Did we miss one? Ah, we do have one head bolt left. It doesn't look too bad in here. So, let's see, that was top dead center of the exhaust stroke. And this is top dead center of the compression stroke. So right here, both valves should be closed, and they do look closed, but if you try to twist them, that'll tell you. So the intake valve is definitely sealed. Exhaust valve, though, is not. You see how I can spin it? So that's likely where all the compression is going. So we actually just need to get the valves out, set the clearance properly, and this engine, I think, will run again. So to get to the valves, we actually need to pull the valve cover to release the valves from the block. And the intake manifold's in the way. So let's get that off. We'll get the valve cover opened up and get these valves out of the block. This line is petrified, so I'm just going to cut it off. We're going to have to replace that later, but for right now, it's kind of in the way of that nut right there. So this is the valve cover right here, and inside we'll find the springs and the retainers. And to service these valves or make valve adjustments, you actually have to grind material off the stem, and I think a lot of people shy away from that just because of how it has to be done. And it's not easy to get to. You actually have to pull the head and pretty much everything off the engine to get to this point. That said, though, it's not a hard adjustment to make. And as these Tecumsehs get up there in age, this is a much more common problem. And this is just a breather. The valves are actually behind here, so we need to get this off. Not sure if I have another gasket for this. I did order a head gasket and the missing head bolts, assuming that it was just a valve issue. Hopefully I ordered one of these too, because these usually do rip. So before I pull these valves out, let's just see where they're at. Now, I haven't looked up the specs on these valves yet as far as what the gap should be, but flatheads, the gap is usually quite large, and I'm going to guess the intake is somewhere between 6 and 8 thousandths, and the exhaust likely somewhere between 8 and 12. So I'm going to start with the exhaust since we're at 0 clearance. And this is the smallest feeler gauge I have at 1.5 thousandths. And yeah, it doesn't fit, which is a problem. We'll check it on the intake. Fits no issue. Let's try something a little bigger. We'll try a 7. And no, 7 thousandths does not fit. A 4 thousandths does, and it's actually pretty loose in there. So I'm thinking this is likely set to 5. Maybe 6 thousandths. We'll try a 6 right now. No, not a 6. So the intake, it's currently at a 5, I would say, due to process of elimination. But I do have a 5 right here. We can double check. And yeah, 5 fits in there actually pretty loose. So somewhere between a 5 and a 6, and the exhaust is at 0. There we go. And the good thing about single cylinder engines too is that, you know, when you lose valve clearance, the engine just stops running. You know, if this was a multi-cylinder engine and a valve is hung open, the engine's going to keep running and you're going to be down a cylinder. And of course, with the valves not sealing, you're going to end up burning the cylinder valve that is hung open. Anyway, let's get the intake off. Because although that one's not at 0, I think 5 thousandths is likely out of spec. I just looked up the valve clearance specs on this engine. The intake actually should be 4 thousandths. And when I just checked it, we were actually a little bit over 5. So we don't need to take any off that valve stem. You know, we will still lap it in, although it feels pretty good. So we're not going to need to do a whole lot there. The exhaust, though, that should be at 8 thousandths. So I'm going to start just by cleaning up the valves. You know, a bit of Scotch-Brite and WD-40 will take a lot of this carbon off. That'll do. I'm going to use a V-block to help hold things kind of square, you know, against the sandpaper. And while doing this, I'm just going to rotate the valve to ensure that everything is nice and flat and even. So the key here is just do a little bit at a time, run over to the machine and check the clearance, because once you take off material, you can't put it back. So if I open this up too much, the only way to fix it is to buy a new valve and start over. Let's start with the 8 thousandths. And that fits, actually, without any drag, so I think I did overshoot it. Let's try a 10. Yeah, 10 also fits, but I can feel a bit of drag. Let's try a 12. and a 12 does not fit. So yeah, I did overshoot it, I'd say by about 2,000. So it's not ideal. I guess what you don't want to do though is overshoot it so much that the engine isn't going to run right. And the decompression system too usually works off bumping the exhaust valve. So if you make that gap too big, the decompression system won't work and it's going to be harder to start the engine. Anyway, at 10,000s, I think we'll be okay. You know, if anything, it's just going to be longer before we need to adjust that again. You know, what happens over time is that the valve wears into the seat. And as it does that, that little gap decreases until you get to 0. So right now, you know, we've reset it and it should last a good long time before somebody needs to do this again. And neither one of these valves spin when pushing down. So I don't technically need to lap them. They're actually seating halfway decent. So if we just cleaned up the head gasket, put a new one on, bolted the head on, you know, we would have compression, I think, at this point. But since we're here, I will spend a minute and we'll just lap the valves real quick and make sure that we don't have to go back in. So I'm just using these towels to kind of block the valve guide. I don't want junk going down in there because that could hang a valve or just cause unnecessary wear when the engine's running. So we'll put those there. I'm going to use a new sharp razor blade to take off, you know, most of the big chunks, and then we'll use something a little bit finer to get the remnants off. it's going to be pretty much the same process here. We need to get the old gasket material off, get the mating surface nice and clean. And the carbon, actually, there's not a lot of buildup here, so you could probably leave good enough alone. But I am going to use a Dremel just to knock off what I can. So we're going to start with the exhaust valve. I did oil that valve stem up. And I'm going to use this Briggs style compressor to shrink the size of the spring. And that'll make it a lot easier to lock it onto that retainer. These head bolts, they get torqued to 200 inch-pounds. I'm going to bring it up about halfway and then finish it off. So I'm going to throw the compression tester on there and just rotate the engine with the drill. But I think before I do that, the belts are still hooked up to what's left of the transmission. So I'm going to pull the cover off, get the belts off. I don't want anything going wrong when I start spinning this at high speed and later when we go to start it. All right, let's give this a try. Last time we had 0, and I think we're going to do better this time. You know, if there's a decompression system, it'll max out at about 60. And if there's not, we want to see at least 100 psi. And I'm going to be spinning this with the drill, so even if there is a decompression system, we might be spinning fast enough to bypass that. Beautiful. We're at 140 psi. So this engine should run quite well. Now, although I'm sure the original plug still works, it has seen better days. There's a lot of corrosion and rust, although where it counts likely is good. But I'm going to put a brand new one in. You know, the same type, RJ19LM. And then we'll get the blower housing on. Now, to get the blower housing on, it's actually held on the top by these 3 head bolts. So we're going to have to pull those out and then retorque them. Before I get the cover back on, I'm going to put a new line back here, since this one is pretty much done. And a little secret, keep that magnet right there. Otherwise, when you're trying to put this on, the magnet keeps pulling things off center. Gonna reuse this gasket. Came off actually pretty clean, and I didn't order a replacement. So, you know, worst case, it could leak a bit of oil, in which case, you know, it's easy enough to swap this out. So what are the odds that this is ready to go? I would say slim, especially since this needle is stuck. So we'll come back to that later. Let's get the bowl off. Yeah, not a good sign. This is really stuck. I can see already the threads, they are full of either thread locker or lots of corrosion. Neither one should be there. I'm actually thinking it's thread locker. Yeah. Someone used thread locker, I think. Nope, it's corrosion. So yeah, this one is pretty bad. Needle is stuck. Bowl seal is trash. So yeah, this carb might be done. You know, I do have extra Tecumseh carbs. I'm not sure if I have this exact one. And even if I do, it's in a bin because it didn't work. But I'm gonna venture to say that whatever's in the bin is better than this. So let me pull a few out, see if we can find one better. So we'll set this aside. Yeah, I think the big thing here is going to be the way this choke works. So we might be able to find a carb that works, but to be honest, you know, I don't have a snowblower to put this on, so even if we have, you know, a choke like that, it should be fine to test with. So let me spend a minute. I'm actually going to remove this bracket anyway so I can get a better look and some measurements. Because a lot of these are for different size Tecumsehs. I'd say all the way up from 5 horse to about 10. And this one is a 5 horse machine. So we need something similar, if not identical. And this one, No, it's a little different. So yeah, give me a minute. I'm going to go through here and find something that physically is the same size. Might have a winner. This one, well, it doesn't look great from the outside, but it is the same carburetor in every aspect. So yeah, let's set this one aside. This one might be the best that I have to choose from here. Actually, we have two, although that one's a little bit different. Yeah, in different size throat. All right. So that's the original that came off the machine. And this one I found in the parts bin. You know, it seems to be the same part. So hopefully it's in a little bit better shape on the inside. But I can tell there is a difference already. That one had an adjustable main jet. That one is fixed. Huh. Yeah, that one's not a lot better. Needle is stuck. And actually the part that holds the needle to the float is broken or rusted away. So yeah, not my first choice. Or my second choice. So let me keep looking. Yeah, I think we might have a winner with this one. It's not in that bad a shape. It's fairly clean. Needle's not stuck. And the throat of the carb is the same size. So it's a different choke mechanism. It is meant for a slightly different Tecumseh. It may not even be for a 5 horse, but I'm willing to bet it'll run the engine. So yeah, this is looking pretty good. So there is a jet behind here. I'm going to get that out. We'll soak this just for a little bit in the ultrasonic, replace the bowl gasket, and we'll give this one a try. There we go. And we'll get this cap off right here. This is just hiding the pilot jet. Now, this is not adjustable on this machine, so, you know, the jetting on this carb likely is not going to be quite right for this engine. That's it. You know, there's not a whole lot to this carburetor. So I'm going to go through the passages, make sure they're clear, and then I'll soak this, we'll put it back together, and try it out. cleaned up pretty well. So it should run the engine. I guess the question is how well. So I'm going to get 2 new O-rings on the emulsion tube. One goes on the top, and the other on the bottom. I'm just going to make sure it goes all the way in, like that. Then we have a new or a used bowl gasket, but one that's a little bit better than that one. So we'll put that on next. All right, that should do. And I think you can see the float should be level, and it's going downhill just a bit. So I'm going to pull this back off, and there's a metal tab we can bend to make an adjustment. Yeah, that's a lot better. There is actually a tool to measure that gap. It should be 3/16 of an inch. We're right there, so I think we'll be okay. So we can put the bowl on, making sure to put this side on the side that has the hinge, like that. And we actually need to put a new gasket on. This was the gasket that came on the main jet. You can see it's torn up right there. So let's scrape that off. I got a better one to put in its place. And last but not least, the pilot jet. All right, let's try it out. I just want to take a second and thank a local subscriber, Stanley. He is the one who actually found this machine and brought it to me. So thank you, Stanley. I appreciate it. Needle and seat, they seem to be working, so let's hook up the plug and try to start it. All right, let's give this a try. We'll turn the ignition on, choke on. Primer, not hooked up. That carb can't accommodate it. Here goes nothing. I wasn't sure how this one was going to turn out. I mean, based on the compression test after we fixed the valve, I knew the engine was capable of running and running well, but the carb that came on here was a total loss. This one technically is not the right part, so I wasn't sure if the jetting was going to work out. But as it turns out, that carburetor runs this engine perfectly. We had no issues getting the engine started. We could rev it fully without issue, and we could idle it down super slow, and the engine ran absolutely perfect. The engine sounded great. I would say this is a very healthy engine, and it's kind of too bad actually that the rest of the snowblower is missing, because I'm willing to bet there was nothing wrong with the snowblower other than the fact it had a bad engine. And now we have an engine that runs very well that has nothing to power. So that said, I am glad I fixed it, because this has been on a shelf for the last year or so. I wasn't sure if this was a parts machine or something that could be used on a project in the future. And now I know that this is a viable engine and can be used in the future to repower a snowblower or potentially a tiller. So until that day comes, I'm going to put this back on a shelf, and you will definitely see this again in the future. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching. All right, I can't help myself. Want to hear it one more time.